Everyone, this is Sydney Graff, and this is my EDL 853 case study. So a summary of our case study is Susan Green's in her first year of teaching as a special education teacher in a K-12 building, I believe. Susan is replacing a 25-year veteran teacher, Mrs. Lewis, who everyone has become very comfortable with at the school. So during the 6 weeks of school, Mrs. Taylor, who is a third grade teacher in the building and is classified as a good teacher by the district, she came to Susan with a concern. Her concern's about a student, Carl Hughes, who is obviously a third grade boy in Mrs. Taylor's classroom, and his behaviors that he has in her classroom. And Carl does have an IEP, and he's been diagnosed with the behavior disorders, or that's his exceptionality on his IEP, possibly. So due to his behaviors, Mrs. Taylor has requested that he be removed from her classroom. She's concerned about her safety as well as the safety of other students and their academic progress. So after trying to collaborate with Mrs. Taylor, Mrs. Green set up a new behavior plan for Carl that was approved by the district superintendent. So then an IEP meeting was called to get parent approval for this new plan. The meeting was held and consent was given, but by the end of it, no one on the team really appeared to be confident or happy with what was just consented to by Carl's parents. So what I know, Mrs. Green is in her first year of teaching as a special education teacher. I know that she is new to the building. She's replacing a 25-year veteran teacher whom everyone has become very comfortable with, to the point where people in the building are trying to tell her, such as Mrs. Taylor, how to write IEPs. I know that Mrs. Taylor is a third grade teacher. I know that Mrs. Taylor has requested that Carl be removed from her classroom. I know that she has come to Mrs. Green with concerns on a daily basis for about a week. I know that she is concerned about the environment that Carl is in and wants him just out of her room completely, without regards to what she could do for him in the general education classroom. I know that she's concerned about safety and well-being of herself and her other students, as well as their academic progress. I know that Carl Hughes is a student with an IEP. I know that he's a third grader. I know that his parents just went through a divorce about 3 months ago, and there are implications that it was not a very pretty divorce. Carl also has two siblings who are older than him, both of which are receiving services for behavior issues as well. I know that they live in a very rural district and there's not much administration present, other than a fellow teacher, which can sometimes make it difficult. And I know that Carl has a behavior disorder, and I think that should be definitely considered when looking at this case. What I need to know the history of Carl's paperwork. I need to know if parents had enough information. Did they give informed consent to this latest plan? I need to know when his last evaluation occurred that measured his IQ. It discussed that Carl had great intellectual abilities, and so he is fully capable of doing the academics that are present in the general education classroom. So I'd be curious to know when that last evaluation took place. So how many years ago was this IQ rated? I'm curious to know what kind of training has been given to all staff, including the special education teacher. Are they trained to physically restrain children? Because there was mention of that. Because if not, placing your hands on a child inappropriately can result in unsafe actions and laws being broken. I would also be curious to know if they've been trained in special education and the policies and the laws that take place, and what some of the steps are that need to be taken before other steps can be taken. And I need to know all of the W's of the physical behaviors that Carl's exhibiting. I need to know when they're occurring. I need to know where. I need to know with who. Is it only with Mrs. Taylor? Because there could be a trend there that nobody's noticing. And I would also want to know the why. Knowing the why can help resolve a lot of issues. The problem, there's a big lack of training on least restrictive environment. And it's very clearly exhibited through Mrs. Taylor that that is happening. Safety is a big problem. I'm concerned about the safety of Mrs. Taylor in her classroom. I'm concerned about Carl's safety, especially if physical restraint was what they decided to use and they had not been trained. And I'm worried about the support. I believe that's a problem as well. I don't think Mrs. Green has the support that she needs to offer Mrs. Taylor the kind of support that she is requesting. So my proposed plan of action is that first I would need to review the active IEP. It is a legal document, so I would also need to make sure that it is being carried out and followed through with fidelity on all ends with everyone who comes into contact with Carl throughout his day. Secondly, I, as an administrator, would need to conference with Mrs. Taylor and Ms. Green on what has happened and strengthen their working relationship. I don't know that it necessarily isn't strengthened, but if anything, Mrs. Taylor needs to recognize that Ms. Green is a new and different person than Mrs. Lewis, who she is replacing. Third, I need to review who is on Carl's team, and then and add persons as appropriate, such as, does he need to see the school counselor on a regular basis? Does he need to have social work services added to his IEP? That's something that would need to be reviewed and discussed. Carl needs to be able to have an advocate for him in the building outside of just his classroom and special education teacher. He needs to have somebody that he's confident in going to and expressing himself with. And he needs to be taught how to use his strategies that are in that behavior plan that was written and approved by parents, rather than just being told. He has to be taught how to use those appropriately. Fifth, professional development needs to be organized and delivered to the staff in the building, whether that be physical restraint or non-crisis intervention type of training, or just overall policies, procedures, laws with special education. And I would probably like to have that organized with staff members, have them research some of those things and deliver it to their coworkers. Next, I would need to consult with our superintendent to review the administrative presence that's in the district. We would need to figure out, does this need to be more? How are we going to let the staff know that we are there to support them rather than just going to a fellow coworker who has her own class to worry about? And then when admin is able to be present, people need to know that they're in the building. So they need to be doing walkthroughs, checking in on the students, checking in on the staff. There needs to be a building-wide protocol that's also set up so that when behaviors like what Carl's exhibiting do happen, there's a plan of action that the entire building knows what steps need to be taken. So resolving this issue, first, Carl needs to be taught how to use his new behavior strategies that have been put in place. And he needs to be able to meet with that school counselor or a cooperative social worker. Next, Ms. Green needs to have that administrative support available to her, and she needs to have resources available to her, whether that is a specialist or a coach coming in to help her with situations like this, or just telling her where to go and look. Where are those great resources at? Finally, Mrs. Taylor needs to be informed of the steps that have to be taken because it's the law. Certain steps and certain data needs to be collected on a child that has concerns like what they have with Carl before they can just be removed entirely from the general education classroom. There are actually lawsuits going on in our world currently right now for this exact reason, is that a child didn't have inclusion services when they were still appropriate because all of the appropriate measures were not considered to be taken. It's also important for her to just follow through with that IEP because, again, it is a legal document. She also, though, needs to be able to feel safe in her own classroom. She needs to be able to feel like her students are safe and the students need to feel safe. And she needs to be able to foster that safe learning environment for them to ensure academic success for everyone. So my personal reflection, what was I thinking about? Why does the staff seem so uninformed? Is it that they're uninformed because they're in a rural district? Or is it because they've just become so comfortable with Mrs. Lewis and comfortable with the way that Mrs. Lewis was doing things when possibly what she was doing wasn't always right? But perhaps she wasn't up to date on what the latest laws were because those resources weren't available to Mrs. Lewis either. What is the protocol in the building when physical behaviors occur? Is there one? Does there need to be one put in place? It doesn't seem like there is. And then what does the data show? Again, those are those W questions, the when, the where, the why, the who. What was I feeling? I was feeling worried about overall safety for students, staff, Carl, Mrs. Taylor, Miss Green, maybe even Carl's dad, because his mom wasn't very happy with him. I'm frustrated at the parents. I feel very strongly about parents, divorced or not, need to put issues aside and focus on their children. It just really helps the kid if parents can work together. I'm feeling concerned and sympathetic for Mrs. Taylor. I'm concerned that she is only seeing her point of view on this issue that's happening with Carl, but I'm also feeling sympathetic for her because she's probably reacting rather than thinking because she doesn't feel safe and she doesn't feel like she's being an adequate teacher to her classroom. I value open communication. It was great that Mrs. Taylor felt comfortable in coming to Miss Green about her concerns, even if it maybe wasn't in the most appropriate way. I'm valuing my positive and safe building, knowing that you have coworkers there to back you up, knowing that all students are safe and there's expectations that everyone should follow. I'm also valuing administrative support. I personally have gone through principals that are not very supportive, and it makes your job as a special education teacher very difficult. And then I've had administrators who are extremely supportive, especially when it comes to my students that have behavior issues. And it makes a world of difference when you have that support. So my reflection on Standard 2 from the academic success standpoint, I provided professional development days for the staff that focused and revolved around special education and physical restraint. I had a building protocol that was established. This would probably avoid some of the time being wasted away from academics if a protocol was established and followed. And then also I implemented walkthroughs when administration was able to be present to ensure that students are receiving quality instruction. The personal well-being, again, the walkthroughs, make sure everyone's feeling safe, making sure they're engaged in their lessons, being present at meetings, whether that be with staff, IEPs, team meetings, anything. Being able to conference with the staff, talking with Miss Taylor or Mrs. Taylor and Miss Green on their working relationship, having that open communication, knowing that I'm there for them, they can come speak to me. And then again, the training of the physical restraints. And then being able to enhance the instructional capacity. Again, a building protocol was established. It'll relieve some of that time that is being spent away from academics when behaviors occur. Walkthroughs again, professional development again, and then also a safe learning environment will be established with that protocol being there and being followed. So this concludes my case study, and I hope that you guys enjoyed watching it. Thanks.